Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel and yet another Mythomorphia spread. So as you can see, my Mythomorphia book is really starting to fall apart and needs a rebind. But before we do that, we're going to take advantage of the fact that I can pull out some pages to do some more wet media. So these two Moom pages, I have had an idea for a while of what I want to do in the background, and it does involve wet media. Now, unfortunately, on the back side, I have completed both sets of pages, so I need to be really careful while I work on this, while I attempt to do this background idea. So I've done a couple of things to prep the pages in preparation for this. The page has had a couple of coats of a clear gesso, just to try and stop the water mediums seeping through, because I do need to work quite wet to achieve the look I want to achieve, and I'm using a lot of liquidy media. And on the back side of both of these is my Cerberus spread and my Rainbow Dragon spread, and they both use materials that if they get wet they're going to bleed. So it is a bit of a risk, but also, you know, I want to do the effect I'm going to do. And I'm filming this voiceover after I've done it. I did have one slight spill through that I'm going to have to clean up, but it's easily fixable. So for the most part, we're doing pretty well. I probably should have taped the outside. That would have been more logical, but I didn't. So onto this this pre-primed page, I start by wetting the surface. And because the gesso is down, the media that I use is going to kind of sit on top a little bit and spread and go all watercolory. And that's the idea, is that I want to create quite an abstract looking effect in the background that then I can work on top of. It's very similar to what I did for the Vintage Leaves page. It's using that same sort of idea, except I've slowed it down so that you can see sort of how I go through the process. So yeah, the gesso has been applied and is fully dried. We did 2 coats of that prior to this recording. And now we're starting by wetting the page. And then in a moment, you'll see I start to pull out some of the Liquitex inks. Now, I pull out a few different colours here. So, sorry, I've got them in front of me, just so I remember the names. So I use muted turquoise, muted grey, and muted green. I also use, oh my goodness, Pyaphyllocyanine blue green shade. That's a mouthful. And those 4 are all transparent colours. And then I also pull out the cerulean blue hue and titanium white. Now, I don't think I actually use the cerulean blue hue in this page, but I have it pulled out. But the transparent ones are the ones that I prefer to use because I still want to see the lines. I'm not trying to cover up the lines. I'm just trying to create an abstract background. So you can see I just used the dropper to drop the ink onto the page. And because of the water that's down there, they will spread a little bit, but they don't spread a lot. So I will also kind of smush the colors around a little bit. And unfortunately, you can see where it starts to bunch on one of those edges, and those edges are where I needed it to not bunch because that's where it can absorb through to the other side. So unfortunately, on the dragon page on the back side, I do have one little spill through to clean up, but considering how badly I could have spilled through on this, we're doing okay. So don't freak out about how dark this is, because this is transparent ink, so it comes out looking really dark, but when we start to spread it out a bit, it will lighten a lot. And I do also use water to try and help thin it out a little bit again as well. So this is also why I sort of pre-prepped the page, because I knew there'd be a lot of wet media going onto this page. So yeah, just start smushing the colours around, and you can see a lot of the transparency start to appear. On this left, yep, that's the left. On this left hand side as well, we're also dealing with some bleed through from the previous page where I used distress inks on the Cerberus page in the background and foreground. So there is also some brown splatter that comes through, but it adds to the sort of watercolory effect we're creating in the background. So it will actually still work out. It's quite alright. So yeah, first for the start, I started using a brush to kind of smush it together, but then I realized I kind of needed to just coat the page a little bit. So I do just start brushing, and because it is very wet and sitting on the surface, it will just sort of move around a little bit as well. And in certain areas, I do let more water pill up. I am trying to be really conscious around the edges to not have it pill up at the edges, because again, that is our risk area for the other side. Potentially, if the ink sort of spreads off and goes onto the paper, then the other side can start picking it up. And that is what is currently happening on the right hand top side of the right side page. You can see that big glob of ink there. Probably should have done one half at a time, but hey. So the next thing I have done here is I've pulled out a tissue and I start picking up some of that excess water and ink, and this also adds to that sort of watery textured effect, because as you can see, I'm not using it smooth. I'm sort of crinkling it up and picking it up in different areas, so we end up with this really sort of textured effect, which I really like the look of. And this also takes away a bit of the pigment and the darkness and that sort of stuff. So you can see I just add some bits in, take some bits off. A lot of this is just a lot of playing at this stage. You can't really predict how these things are going to turn out. You just sort of play, control. It's me just checking the back, realizing that we've got a water droplet on the piece of paper and it's starting to affect the other side, so I remove it from my little protection against the desk and begin smushing out this one. And yeah, this is where I see that big glob and I'm like, ooh noos, and you can see the little bleed through on the other side. So I start trying to move that ink around and do what I can to make the damage not as bad. But again, it is just a little bit on the top right, and the rainbow dragon on the other side is mostly completed. I have got one more pencil coat to do, and I was thinking about doing another glitter coat in the background, so I can also just pull out some white acrylic ink, cover up where that bleed through happened, and then cover it again in glitter. So the dragon on the other side, it's a minor fix up, and for the effect that this produced, I don't mind risking it. And at the end of the day, it's fine. It's just adding to the page. Okay, it bled through, that's fine. So yeah, you see there I started laying the tissue down flat and I realized it picked up way too much, so we scrunched it up again and did the scrunchy pickup, and then I start to add some of the ink colors back in. And again, because I'm working on a slightly damped but gessoed surface, the water that I'm applying is just sitting on top, so this does stay wet for a little bit longer. There's nowhere for that water and pigment to absorb, so you can kind of keep playing and smushing stuff around for a little bit as well, which is quite good and adds up really well for layering on different bits and pieces. Yeah, me just checking the back again, making sure, working on that one area where the ink did pull. But yeah, despite that one edge corner, there's no other bleed through, there's no splotches of ink, and I do put a lot of media on this page, so it's pretty good. So here I've just given it a couple minutes to dry. I have changed out the protection paper underneath, so there's any of the wet inks that are being brushed onto the previous page will no longer be picked up by the underside of these pages. So I swap out the papers, and again it's still a little damp, so you can still add a little bit of surface detail. So next I pull out my Kaisercraft iridescent sprays, and I love these sprays. They're so pretty. They add a perfect amount of sparkle, and because they're sprays you can kind of splatter them. So I am using Kaisercraft iridescent mist, sorry, I should name it right. So I'm using the navy iridescent, the turquoise iridescent, and the white iridescent. And these other brands that do these sort of things as well. I'm just using these because I happen to have them. I got these on clearance like forever ago, and they're really good. They do have a tendency to bleed through on normal pages if you don't have a gesso layer on there, so it's something to be aware of. They also are, like, the navy looks black. It is intense. A lot of these look really intense when they first come out, so but they do dry a lot lighter, and again, you can also lift the pigment up, which is what I end up doing as well. So you can see on some of them that they are spreading out quite a bit, and then some of them they're just sort of sitting on the surface. It depends on how wet the particular page underneath is. And then here we are with the white, and I use a lot more of the white because the white is almost clear, and helps sort of spread it around and just add a bit of sparkle and prettiness, and again just sort of blend what is there. So there's a lot more of the white going down. The white really dries quite translucently clear, so it's not like big white splatters. A lot of this disappears, but it will add that beautiful shimmer in the background. And you would have noticed when I'm spraying it as well, I start by doing a spritz into a tissue and then spray on the page. And what I'm doing is I'm half pumping the sprayer, and this produces more of that splotchy drops as opposed to just a fine mist that goes everywhere, because I want more of a splatter effect than a fine mist that could cover everything. So if you ever want to try and make more splotchy sprays from a spray bottle, spray it into something first, keep it pressed down, and then just sort of half press down, and it produces a more spritzy, splotchy spray. And then once again, I am using my tissue to pick up excess ink and just create some texture, some definition around. And now what I am doing is I am pulling out the Liquitex ink again, but this time I'm using the acrylic white. I start by trying to put some into my palette, but then I forget about the fact that there is undertones, like I've got some other inks in the palette that I forgot about. I actually have some of the Kaisercraft Navy Iridescent ink in the palette, so I'm like, well, I could mix those and start making like an iridescent light blue or something. I'm just sort of playing at this stage, and nothing's really coming off or showing up all that well here, so I'm like, this isn't really achieving what I want. And then I realize I can just splatter white ink directly from the bottle. So that's what I end up doing. I grab a paintbrush, I just dip it straight into the acrylic ink now and start splattering it. And this is an opaque ink, so the white is, this is the not translucent, like the Kaisercraft iridescent white spray was very translucent. A lot of the inks I use are translucent. This acrylic ink is an opaque one, so this will show up and stay very clearly defined. And there's been no trying time, so the paper's still a little damp. Again, I have pulled up a lot of the excess, so it's not like damp, but it is definitely still wet. So again, some of these splots do spread out a little bit, but some of them stay really crisply defined, and that's really quite nice. Like, having that differentiation is really nice. And again, we're going to do a couple of things. So some of these dots will fade away, some of these dots will stand even more out. And I will possibly, once I've finished the page as well, go back over and add more splots on top, because I really like splatter and mess, and it just adds a lot of texture and interest to the page. So you'll see in a lot of my works I do end up going a bit splattery, for lack of a better word. I like splatter. I either like a really controlled page where I'm working only with pencils and it's very neat and very controlled and tight, or I like using all the media and just chucking stuff at a page, and I mean literally chucking stuff at a page. So now into the well where I have the slight amount of white and the iridescent navy Kaisercraft spray, I drop in the muted grey. So it's called muted grey, but it's really more of like a purple grey. It's a really pretty tone. And I'm using this to add a bit of shadow and definition, because Some of these areas are too light. So I start again with splatter because we do love our splatter. But because of the nature of the ink, it does... I forgot to mute my phone for the voiceover. Whoops. Because of the nature of the ink, it is very intense. So again, tissue, pick some of it up, and then you get that more paler, purpley grey effect. And you can also water these inks down to make them even more transparent. So yeah, I use my brush to sort of control some of the areas, and then some I just drop straight down. And you can see I'm also starting to play here with creating some specific definition. So I want to pull out the characters a bit more from the background. So I use this color almost as a shadow tone to start defining the merms away from the background. And this lighting situation is kind of making it look a lot more purple and warm tone. There is a lot more green to it that is not being picked up. I've got a new lighting setup, so I'm still figuring out how to adjust my cameras accordingly for this light setup, so please bear with me. But it's definitely helping with the shadows a little bit and my weird apartment lighting situation, which I do enjoy. It is nice to not have to worry so much about the shadows and weird lights. So now I've just got to work on the color balance again. Every time you get a new piece of technology, everything has to change. So yeah, now it's just a lot of playing. It's a lot of adding color, removing where I don't want it so intense, adding more back in. So when I put up my vintage leaves page, I had a question about if you could achieve the same effect with a watercolor, and you absolutely could. You could also achieve this with gouache. You could also achieve it with watered down acrylics. A way to achieve this effect is by placing that gesso base so that whatever you use does not become absorbed into the paper and sits on the surface, and then working with a transparent medium for the majority of this. So watercolors, gouache watered down, and these are acrylic inks. I chose the acrylic inks because it's basically watered down acrylic paint, and I didn't have to water it down, and I have them and they were in the right colors. So that was just pure laziness, but even acrylic paint that has been significantly watered down would achieve this effect as well. Yeah, there is any sort of wet soluble materials would work, and you could also achieve that sort of abstracty watery background effect by using like water soluble crayons or pencils even, and then just really activating and smushing those colors around could also achieve this. You might need to do a couple of layers, but if you use that, you wouldn't need as much water, so you could get away with not possibly gessoing the background. So that's another option. I've also achieved this sort of look by using distress inks and then activating splatter effects in them. So you could almost use those in a combination of colors and just randomly placing and then activating them. But distress inks, I do find when activated can bleed through. Any of the water soluble brush markers, basically if you've got a water soluble medium, you could achieve this look. You could also sit there and pedantically color it out in pencils, but that would take a lot of time, probably not look the same, and water soluble media is a lot easier. But the main thing is to be considerate of what is on the backside. So in a book like Kirby Roseanne's, where we have got those images on the backside and completed images on the backside, it does make it a little bit more scary. So as I said earlier, one of the things I could have done to help with this was I could have actually taped the pages down and that would have removed that little edge area, which could have stopped any potential pooling of inks on the surface behind, which then gets absorbed by the reverse side. The gesso did stop any ink from the side seeping through and affecting the other side. It was purely just the edges where the risk was, and as I said, it only occurred at one section because I was trying to be very conscious of it. So if I had taped it down, that would have been a way to prevent it. However, I didn't want a very clear border edge. It's just a personal look preference for me. In these books, I like to work as close to the edge as possible, which is also one of the reasons why I've not rebound Mythomorphia yet. It is falling more and more apart, and it needs to be rebound, but I don't want to do this till I complete it, because once it's bound, then it's going to be very difficult to work in the spine. At the moment, because it is falling apart, working right up to the edge is very easy because the edge is exposed because half the pages are falling out. Oh goodness, yeah. So these 2 pages have come out. We've got a couple more in the middle. I've got a whole second section that now has fallen out as well. So it's very handy when you are working wet media in this book and you want to work a spread and then you put it aside to dry, and you can work on another spread because the other spread is drying and it's removed from the book. So there are advantages to having this book falling apart, and it's at a point where I think I should just pull the whole book apart, have it all as loose pages, work on what I want to work on, and then at the end merge it all together, rebind it. So yeah, now I'm just playing. I'm just adding in that sort of muted grey where I want a little bit more variation in tone. And then when it's too dark, I just pick some of it up and remove it from the page and let the stain of the ink affect the page. So I'm not being too pedantic here. Again, it is really just making sure that these mooms are defined away from the background a bit more, just adding some definition. And of course, when I add in the next lot of colours, that will help as well. So I hope you've enjoyed watching me play as I work on this background. It's not really a sit-down planned experience. It's just a play and see how things go type process. So hopefully this little tutorial voiceover thing helps you and you've enjoyed watching the process. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like and comment and do all the algorithm things to make YouTube happy. And I'll see you on the next video. Bye.